Opening the door to flank pressure, this immediately challenges black's central ambitions by aiming for an unbalanced game. Opening the door for its queen and bishop, this choice prepares for solid central pawn play. Developing the knight to c3 eyes the d5 square, a common battleground in this opening. Immediately challenging the center with d5 opens lines and creates dynamic possibilities, though it requires careful attention to piece development. Asserting central dominion, this pawn advance immediately contests black's ambitious pawn thrust and shapes the ensuing positional struggle. Unlocking the queenside, this knight immediately contests central space and prepares for a solid development. Liberating the d-file for queenside pressure, this capture simplifies while setting up potential pawn breaks. Reclaiming the pawn instantly opens up the center and offers black active piece play, a welcome development. Developing the bishop here immediately challenges black's central pawn structure. Solidifying the center's structure, this move prepares for queenside expansion and offers the bishop a clear retreat square. Solidifying the center's pawn chain allows for eventual piece development, aiming for harmonious play rather than immediate fireworks. Solidifying the pawn structure, this bishop now prepares to contest the light squares. Bringing the queen to this square prepares for development and potentially a kingside attack. Securing the king's safety is paramount, and this castling initiates a standard defensive posture in the queen's pawn structure. Preparing to castle kingside, this bishop also clears the way for a pawn advance or knight development on the queenside, enhancing piece coordination. Developing the knight to d7 supports the e5 square and prepares for queenside expansion, keeping options open for the bishop. Developing the knight towards the king's flank aims to support a potential kingside pawn push later on. Disrupting white's bishop presence, this pawn push creates a strategic dilemma for their development. Gaining space on the queenside and preparing for potential pawn breaks is the idea here. Opening the e-file for the rook to contest provides immediate central pressure and prepares for potential kingside pawn advances. Reinforcing the central pawn chain is a solid positional idea, though it slightly hinders the kingside knight's natural squares. Challenging the central pawn structure, this bid for queenside space ignites a dynamic battle for control. Committing the king to safety unlocks central counterplay potential. Preempting b5 expansion to solidify the queenside pawn structure. Radicalize the central presence, eyeing the open d-file and preparing to assert dominance over the middle of the board. Pushing the b-pawn aggressively stakes a claim on the queenside, potentially opening lines for counterplay and aiming to disrupt white's positional grip. Shifting the bishop to f2 clears the d-file for the rook and bolsters the kingside's defensive network. Black boldly challenges white's central pawn structure, aiming to disrupt harmony and gain queenside space. Sharpening the bishop's influence, it now eyes the queenside weakness and prepares for future skirmishes, potentially controlling vital diagonals. The knight maneuvers towards the queenside, eyeing central control and potential outpost squares. Centralizing the knight offers a dynamic repositioning, eyeing the weakened d5 pawn and potentially creating attacking avenues on the kingside. Developing the bishop to a more active square, aiming to connect rooks and pressure white's queenside. Securing the queenside advance, a3 aims to prevent black's queenside expansion and gain breathing room. Liberating the bishop from its pawn chain unlocks diagonals and prepares for potential queenside expansion. Initiating a central pawn break with e4 dramatically alters the board's dynamics, aiming to shatter black's pawn chain and open lines. Solidifying the pawn chain and preparing a counterthrust on the queenside is a wise reaction to white's encroaching center. Opening the h-file for potential endgame infiltration, this move also aims to reposition the bishop for more active play on the queenside. Sensing pressure on the queenside, black advances the pawn to seize more space and potentially challenge white's central control. Aggressively pushing the pawn forward aims to seize central space and restrict black's pieces, creating dynamic imbalance. Unleashing the queenside, This pawn thrust aims to disrupt white's solid structure and seize initiative. Consolidating the knight on a better square frees the e-file and prepares potential central advances. Black reclaims central space, though the knight's journey to the queenside might feel a tad circuitous for the moment. Aggressively seizing central space, white opens lines to attack the weakened kingside. Asserting the bishop to a more active diagonal, this move prepares to disrupt white's queenside pawn structure and potentially liberate the knight. Securing the file for potential invasion, Ra1 aims to challenge black's queenside expansion and prepare a rook lift. Attacking the isolated rook with the bishop creates immediate diagonal pressure and seeks to disrupt white's pawn structure. Seeking to dislodge black's entrenched pieces from the queenside, white initiates a strategic repositioning of the queen to activate the kingside diagonal. This pawn thrust aggressively challenges white's queen's position and aims to disrupt their queenside structure, creating potential for counterplay. Capturing the pawn opens the a-file, potentially targeting black's undeveloped queenside pieces and creating dynamism. Seizing the open file with the rook immediately prepares a counterattack against white's queenside pawn structure. Exploiting the pin, white ignites a dangerous tactical skirmish on the kingside, sacrificing material for initiative. Sacrificing material here opens critical lines, but the exposed king now faces immediate tactical repercussions. Pouncing on the exposed king, this bishop exchange aims to shatter black's defensive pawn shield. Bringing the queen into the fray aims to contest the open files, but it might neglect defending that suddenly vulnerable kingside pawn structure. Reinforcing the knight's forward presence, this prepares for central dominance and potential knight outpost occupation. Developing the bishop to d7 offers crucial support for the queenside and prepares for potential queenside counterplay. This bishop trade dramatically alters the kingside dynamics, potentially simplifying while opening lines. Reclaiming the central pawn and eyeing the open d-file, black repositions his knight to a more active square, ready to participate in the queenside initiative. Unleashing a powerful discovered attack, white forces the black king onto a dangerous diagonal, aiming for rapid mating net development. Sacrificing the queen for such a weak attack, this gambit seems unlikely to deliver the necessary knockout punch against white's robust central control and castled king. Unleashing the queen to reignite the kingside attack, aiming to exploit the exposed royal. Unlocking the file and disrupting white's central grip, black initiates a decisive counterplay. Asserting dominion over the open rook file immediately pressures black's vulnerable queen and aims to disrupt their defensive setup. Securing the queen on f7 might seem safe, but it surrenders central influence and leaves the king exposed to future threats. The rook repositions aggressively, eyeing the weakened kingside structure and preparing to infiltrate black's territory. Sacrificing the knight creates immediate chaos, potentially opening lines but leaving the king exposed to a mating net. Unlocking the center's tension suddenly grants white a powerful passed pawn, threatening to sweep through black's defenses. Reclaiming the initiative, black targets the vulnerable white king with fresh attacking lines opening up. Forcing an exchange streamlines the path to a simplified position, potentially offering better endgame prospects for white. Black simplifies into an endgame where their rook can become very active on the open c-file. Reigniting the kingside attack, this knight seeks better squares and targets black's exposed monarch. Reactivating the rook to challenge the open file, this aims to disrupt white's bishop pair and potentially create counterplay. The monarch ventures forth, seeking shelter from the looming tactical storm and preparing to reinforce the central structure. The passed pawn's advance now creates immediate tension, potentially overwhelming the weakened queenside structure. Opening the b-file offers fresh attacking avenues after the pawn sacrifice. Unleashing the passed pawn, black aims to disrupt white's consolidated structure and create dynamic counterplay with the newly opened file. Unlocking the open c-file now offers a direct avenue for your rook to pressure black's isolated pawns. Reactivating the bishop to the central diagonal, the piece now eyes the weakened kingside pawns and supports potential pawn pushes. Exchanges off black's most active piece, simplifying into a favorable endgame with a clear pawn majority. Recapturing with the rook finally stabilizes the position, but the passed pawn on c3 remains a persistent threat for white to manage. Activating the rook on the open file aims to exploit black's exposed king and material advantage. Reactivating the knight, nf8 aims to bolster the kingside defenses and potentially join the queenside counterplay. The king steps forward to centralize and offer support to the pawn majority. Reasserting knight presence in the center offers a fresh defensive pawn structure. Preparing a kingside pawn storm to seize initiative. Opening the h-file offers a potential escape for the king and opens up offensive possibilities down the flank. The king's journey across the open center now faces renewed pressure from black's activated pieces. This pawn push aims to exploit the open files and potentially create passed pawns. Targeting the weak pawn chain, this knight jump aims to disrupt black's queenside structure and create further complications. Abandoning the kingside defense, the rook now seeks active counterplay on the open c-file, aiming to disrupt white's centralized pawn structure. This knight ventures deep, aiming to disrupt black's pawn structure and pressure the queenside. Embracing the open files, the king seeks a safer haven amidst the looming activity. A bold gambit to seize initiative, sacrificing material for a dangerous passed pawn and open king attack. Shifting the knight to d8 aims to support the pawn push on d4 and potentially prepare for a counterattack on the kingside. A devastating fork, exploiting the pinned knight and opening a path to victory. Relocating the king from the exposed d-file is a wise decision, seeking safer pastures away from the rampant knight. Reclaiming central space with the knight solidifies white's control over key squares and prepares further pawn advances. Securing the rook's position on the 7th rank is crucial, preparing for potential kingside skirmishes. Sacrificing tempo to initiate a pawn race now becomes paramount. Unleashing the knight to contest the central file signals a decisive turn toward a tactical endgame. Liberating the rook to pressure black's isolated pawn and activate an endgame advantage. Unmasking the king with a fork, this audacious check forces a significant structural shift in white's defense. Seizing the initiative by exposing the black king to immediate threats across the open diagonals.